Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar on creating a positive donor experience. My name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. I'm going to give people about one more minute or so to log in and then we will get started. We will be recording today's webinar as well as sending out the slides in the eval email that goes out following the webinar. So no need to take pictures or take too many notes. We will be sending everything out. At any point throughout today's webinar, please feel free to ask questions. I'll try to leave some time at the end to answer anything that comes up, but if you have a question during the webinar, how you can submit that is just via the question box on GoToWebinar. So what that looks like is just a little chat icon, a little message icon with a question mark inside of it. So you can click it, submit the question, and I'll try to get to as many as we can. Otherwise, I'll follow up offline with you if I can't get to everything here. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started again. Welcome to anyone who just joined. My name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. We will be recording today's webinar as well as sending out the slides. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit them via the question box here on the platform. So today we're gonna be talking about donor experience and really how to create a positive donor experience. So we're thinking about this in the way that we're going to build and retain relationships. So what I'm going to do today is walk through the different stages of the donor cycle and then talking, at each stage about how we can be authentic and personalized with our donors, creating that positive experience for them, but also keeping in mind our own capacity. So I'll offer up different tips, if you're thinking about this on the major donor scale, so maybe you're going to do a little bit more individualized relationship building, and I'll also share some tips around, if you're considering different groups of donors, how you can do that a little bit on a larger scale there. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. So super high level, just like to start with the slide, just what the donor cycle is and kind of each of the stages I'll talk through here. First is that identification, so finding donors, understanding our donors, who they are, and kind of bringing them into our organization. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we can be thinking about creating identities for donors, how we can use that to tailor our communications, and different factors we should be considering. Then goes into cultivation, and which is really the relationship side, building side of things. We're really thinking about making sure that our donors are aware of what's going on in our organization, the need of our organization. So ultimately, when we solicit and ask them to donate, they're aware of what they're donating to. They're bought into our mission. They understand the impact. They care about us as an organization and want to support the work that we're doing. And then from there, we move from solicitation to stewardship. And stewardship is kind of, I think, the other side of the coin for cultivation. It's just as much as relationship building as cultivation is. But stewardship, when we're thinking about that specifically, a lot of times we're thinking about thanking folks. And when we're really thinking about genuinely stewarding our donors, we're thinking not only how do we thank them, how are we making them feel like a valued member of our donor community, of our supporter community, but we're also thinking about how do we continue to build that relationship. Again, that's kind of why I think of it as kind of the other side of the coin of cultivation. Both stewardship and cultivation really are about building the relationship with our donors. One, to kind of get them to the point of understanding our organization enough to want to give and contribute. And the other is really to keep them in our network, keep them as a supporter and an engaged person in our network. So this is really, again, a cycle. People will move from parts of the cycle to another, but when we're really thinking about a lot of our donors, again, when I'm thinking about that positive donor experience, I'll talk about kind of each of these parts of the cycle and kind of what that could look like. So first tip here is really in the identification side of things, and it's understanding our donors. And when we think about this, what we really want to do is understand who our donors are and how can we help them become something. Become someone. A lot of what we're sharing here today is really around intentional relationship building. So as we're thinking about this, you want to be thinking both, who are our donors, and then what kind of are their motivations? So first, when we're thinking about who are donors, identifying, their occupation, age, geographical location, DC, Maryland, Virginia, is it elsewhere? Any hobbies, professional associations that they're part of, their interests, their professional experiences, any affiliations with specific organizations. Better understanding our donors allows us to then create either segments of our audience that we will target specific communications to. It also allows us on the major donor side to really tailor communications and tailor the relationships based on who these folks are. So one, it's just really important that we're taking some time as an organization to understand who our current donors are and who are we trying to target. If we're trying to target everyone under the sun who might care about our mission, that is great, and that might work for your organization. But it's also a little bit like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It's not as much of a strategy, right? So you're thinking about who do you have as a donor currently? What different identities do they hold? Are there any shared identities that would allow you to kind of segment communications or touch on things that might be specifically interesting to them? You also might be thinking about who do you want your donors to be? Who are you going to identify and find to be supporters of your organization based on who you already have in your network, right? So if you know that all of your folks who support your work are in a specific neighborhood, you might be targeting, that neighborhood. Maybe you're posting on community boards. Maybe you're showing up at community events because those folks are probably more likely to be deeply engaged in your work. So just really thinking about understanding your donors allows you to then be meeting your donors where you are and creating an experience that makes sense for them and kind of meets them where they are. On the other side of things, we're also thinking about donor identity and how we can help those donors become someone. So one way we can connect our donors or further foster the connection they already have with us is to really focus on the role they play at the organization and really help them feel more active in that role. What does their donation do? How do they feel when they donate? So I have a couple different donor identities. This list in no way is exhaustive. There are plenty of different donor identities, but these are the ones we see kind of most common playing out and allowing us to kind of tailor our communications in a way that meets this. So you have change agent. These are folks who are thinking about, by supporting and driving your organization's impact in the community, they're making a difference. Maybe they're a helper, right? They feel that they're doing something good when they support you. Maybe they see their financial support as a way to fight back or protest larger issues. They might think of themselves, right, as active citizens. By supporting your work, they're doing their civic duty. Of course, there's a lot of, again, different identities. There's caretakers, by supporting your organization, they're helping people to grow. They're joining a group. They want to be a part of the kind of crowd that's supporting the work that you're doing. But again, as you think about the different identities, right, change agent, helper, protester, active citizen, these identities are useful as you develop any donor recruitment language, as you refine your thank you letters, your impact reports to really strengthen the donor experience and build connection, right? If we know that majority of our donors are part of our network because they're driven by impact, then a lot of the reports and communications, our thank yous, will be really focused on impact. If we think about kind of the protester, by supporting, they're fighting back. We might talk a lot about kind of where we were previously as an organization and where we are now and what we're going to continue to do. We're talking really about the lifespan of the organization. So again, this is something that you can use on that major donor side. If you know your major donors are coming to you and the reason that they give to you is for one of these reasons, you would tailor your communications to them, maybe bringing together a couple of these identities. But also if you see this on a larger scale for a type of donor, maybe all your mid to level or your grassroots donors all seem to have a very similar identity, or when you've used language around kind of being an active citizen, you've seen more engagement, then you may decide to tailor your communications in that way, even though, that only maybe covers 80% of folks. So again, this is just something that we might be using to better relate to our donors. This is just our first tip. We're thinking about in the identification stage, who are our donors, who do we want our donors to be, and then how can we best relate to them as we think about initially communicating with them. The next tip here is just to understand your donors' motivations. So, I was talking about the different donor identities. This kind of continues on and really thinks about how do we get information to our donors, or how are we compelling donors to give to our organizations, or activating them to support our organizations. So we kind of use the acronym GIVE, and I'll go through these, and I won't spend too much time on all these because there's lots to cover today. And we have a full workshop on kind of making the ask and the different donor motivations. But when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about those that are motivated by game plan, those that are motivated by information, those that are motivated by vision, and those that are motivated by emotions. And most times, when we are making an appeal to our donors, we're going to employ a couple of these different tactics and kind of motivations. But it's important to kind of know that there are a couple different ways to be thinking about making an ask to folks, and trying to understand your donors best, what resonates most with them, so you can spend your time drafting communications, really tailoring your message. So with game plan, this is really where we're connecting donors via logistics. So it means we're persuading someone to support you because of a well thought out plan, and you're giving them the insider scoop by sharing details with them. So as you craft this piece of your pitch, you're giving them a game plan for how you're going to deliver on your promise. So this is really the how you'll do it of your work. If you're meeting with someone one-on-one and you're not sure of their motivations, these are some questions you might hear that would kind of give you a clue of this is something that they're motivated by. They might be asking you, where do donations go? What's your experience with the work? How did you develop your curriculum or your programming? They want to hear the how behind it. So if you're in conversations with folks who are asking these questions, you probably, they're probably motivated a lot by game plan. And so spending time talking through what this looks like for your organization can be really helpful for building that relationship. As we're thinking about this, cultivating, so kind of moving from identification to cultivation, cultivating donors who are motivated by game plan might look like offering an event to reveal your new strategic plan or an annual report, your goals. So you might be hosting an event for folks around revealing new information, kind of the plan for the year. And that would be your cultivation event if you find that most folks in your network are motivated by game plan. The next right is information. This is really as a motivator, someone who's motivated because of the facts. So it doesn't mean we necessarily need to go into facts and figures about the need as much, but rather proof of concept and evidence of our impact. And this is something that we find that most organizations are really doing well, sharing their impact, sharing those stats, maybe sharing testimonials there. We're sharing what we've done, that evidence that will have a lasting impact, really focusing on our accomplishments. These are folks who an infographic is really helpful. They like to see those numbers. So, when you're thinking of folks, again, in that one-on-one conversation, if you're getting questions such as, how many clients do you serve? Or do you have any stats or graphs to show your impact? Or how do you measure your impact? These are folks who are probably motivated by information. And so giving them more facts can be really, really helpful here. Similarly, cultivation here can really look like an informational event. Maybe it could be shadowing a program or, that reveal of a strategic plan or plans that you have as an organization. When we get to vision, this is where we are, thinking about connecting with our audience by sharing our long-term goals. So for those motivated by vision, we're sharing our long-term goals and where we want to be. We're explaining future programs and talking about what we expect to achieve. When we're folks who have this type of motivation, we'll be asking, why did you start this work? Or what's your 5-year plan? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to see the program go? So they're trying to understand the work that you're doing and the history of it and kind of where you're going as an organization. Cultivation with this audience could look like doing a listening session with folks. Again, sharing a strategic plan could be great. Could be doing a listening session, hearing what people would like to see for the future of the organization. Could be giving an opportunity for stakeholders to weigh in, especially if you are in a strategic planning process through a survey or another avenue where they can weigh in on the vision. So thinking about what that looks like. And then finally, the last motivator I want to just share here is that, going through the GIVE acronym is emotions. And an emotion is a motivator because they can energize behavior. They really drive, particular people to feel a certain way and act in accordance with that. So as we're thinking about this, questions folks might ask are, do you have any examples, success stories? They might share a story, something that relates to them. They might ask you questions about yourself. This is someone who is really giving to you and your organization because of that connection, either with a client, the testimonials you're sharing, you as a leader of the organization or your staff or volunteers. So you're really thinking about the emotion, and a lot of this comes out specifically in storytelling. We are talking about telling a story and letting people connect with each other through that story. When we're thinking about here, cultivation here could look like, offering volunteer days, offering program shadowing days, offering to or bringing them to an event where they get to hear or have a panel of community members or clients, if it makes sense for your organization, or getting to interact with those who are impacted by your work. So as we're thinking about this, when we're thinking about creating that positive donor experience, we're thinking about tailoring our communications in a way that gets to the different motivators of folks, but also think about how would we then cultivate them, right? Because cultivating is building that relationship. So not only are we understanding our audience, understanding their motivations, but offering events or offering opportunities for them to dive deeper into these motivations, right? Is it that they get to know more about our organization, that they get to shadow something or volunteer? Is it that we have an opportunity to reveal or involve them in strategic planning? So starting to think about both the identities they hold and then also the motivations can really allow us, again, to tailor our communications as an organization. So going in here to tip number 4 here is really communicating with donors. So, I'm talk a lot about this, and I'll start to kind of go into this more here, but we're really thinking about making our donors aware of impact. And this is really important, right? At the end of the day, donors want to know what we're doing. And so a couple different things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about making sure that donors are aware of what's happening and that they always know what they can do to further engage with our organization. So on one hand, when we're thinking about communicating with donors, a lot of times this manifests itself as a newsletter, but also could be just in general communications with donors. So as we're thinking about what to share, either in a newsletter or in communications, always sharing about impact. And again, I won't spend too much time here because I have a full slide specifically on impact, but thinking about stories, testimonials, data, client and program narratives. At any point, when we're communicating with our donors, that should be the easiest thing for us to share. We have that right away. That's why we're compelling people to support our work. It's also what we want people to be sharing about us. When they're out in the community being advocates for us as an organization, we want them to be sharing our impact. The other piece of things we can share with folks is internal. So when we're thinking, again, about a donor newsletter or building that relationship one-on-one with a major donor, maybe we're doing staff highlights or we're talking about a new program, an award that we've received, history of our organization, anything that's kind of that inside look that allows donors to feel like because they're giving to our organization, because they're supporting us, we're telling them a little bit more than we do to the general public. On the community side of things, this is really helpful for folks to see, and understand how we are partnering in the community and how we're showing up for our community members and clients. So maybe this looks like a volunteer spotlight, an event where you partnered with another organization, or sharing even about community or the social issue you work in's history. So again, when we're thinking about this, these are some things we can communicate with donors. At the larger scale, we're thinking about this as a donor newsletter. At the more individualized scale, it's these individual relationships with major donors that we're kind of sharing this information. As we communicate with donors, we always want to make sure that there is something that they can do to continue to engage with our organization, that the conversation isn't the end. So to that point, you're thinking about asking them to do something. So this can look like joining. So asking an audience to come to an event, either a community event or our own. And it's a great chance to highlight small activations we're doing. When we think about do, we're asking our audience to take an action. So this could be donate, volunteer, personal action. We want to avoid active solicitation in most newsletters if this is kind of in that donor newsletter space, but being specific about what we're asking them to do, and then always giving an option, right, to volunteer, to give. And then finally, activate. You're asking your audience to share your message. And this could be formal advocacy, could be personal advocacy, or self. And self-advocacy is really about learning more and give. So maybe you're giving them something to read. Personal advocacy is sharing with a friend. So asking them to share an article or tell them someone about your organization this week. Share the impact the organization has had on them this week. So really just thinking about, again, we're creating this experience, we're cultivating folks before we're making that ask. We're really thinking about what would be important for donors. How do we let them know that they're important to us? And a lot of times it's through that communication, keeping them aware of what's happening. A couple just different things to keep in mind as we're thinking about communicating with our donors. One is just, transferring energy. Sounds kind of funny sometimes, but persuasive people transfer energy to motivate their audience. So the more that we can be motivating in our donor newsletter, share that impact, ask them to join us, be a part of the group, be a part of the change and impact. If we're thinking about that in our communications, it'll transfer. They'll get excited, kind of rally behind what we're doing here. gain small wins, right? You want to start with statements that your audience will agree with to build a foundation. Start with what they already know before you're revealing new information. Making sure that each of the times you're connecting are really kind of on that common ground. And then finally, asking questions, back to kind of creating that authentic communication, giving folks something to do. People like to know that you're listening. So asking questions to show you care, giving an opportunity to weigh in, if that makes sense, again, for your organization, thinking about that. So I want to dive just a little bit deeper into impact before we kind of move into stewardship and thinking about what that looks like for the donor experience here. But here's just really making donors aware of impact. And we want to do this because we want to make it easy for them to share about our organizations. So when we're thinking about this donor experience, we want our donors, one, to give to our organization, to feel valued, but we also want them to feel a part of the network and that they are a part of the change. And being part of a change or being part of making an impact in this region is sharing with our networks, with our community, and being a part of community. So the more that we can make it easy for our donors to be advocates on our behalf, the more positive experience we're really creating there. So as we think about this, we really think of impact in a couple ways. One is just the impact of them as a donor, right? So we're showing efficacy and how the donor has made a direct impact on our work. We're keeping it to scale, right? If we're achieving, they're giving to our organization at a certain level, we're not going to say that everything our organization is doing is because of them, right? We're thinking about what has their donation done in the last year, or what have individual donations done for your organization in the last year. Kind of keeping it to a timeline helps to keep it at scale. Also can talk about, again, if you have the time and capacity to personalize this, if you have year to date what they've given to your organization, being able to even share what that has meant for the organization. With this, when we're sharing impact, we're sharing data, testimonials, any exciting milestones that we have that we can share there. On the personal side, we're thinking about, making some type of reference to a personal detail or interest, making donors feel like individuals and not a group. And I will say specifically, this is great, at that major donor level when we're able to have those individual relationships with donors and get to know them a little bit better, understand maybe their family or their interests and hobbies, tie them into conversations. But this can also be done at a larger scale if, we don't have that ability to meet with our different donors at different levels. This could look like segmenting your audience. Maybe you have a segment of donors that all came in as volunteers. So you're going to reference a volunteer event that they all may be aware of. You may have folks that all came to an event and that's how they found your organization. So you're creating a little bit more personalization in a segmented group versus personalized communication on that one-to-one level. And then finally, thinking about part of a team, thinking about us and we, not you and us. So thinking about how do we make them feel like they truly are part of our team, because we need those donor dollars to keep being able to do our work here. So treating and communicating to donors as change agents and members of the team. So really thinking about what that impact looks like. So as we've done this, kind of as we have cultivated our donors, as we've made this ask, right, given them something to do, the next kind of last piece I want to just talk through here, and then I will take some questions. So feel free, if you have them, to put them in the chat. The last piece I want to talk about is stewardship. So creating a positive experience in the stewardship side of things. And I will say we have webinars on all 4 stages here. This really is that overview of how are we creating intentionality between each of these stages. But if you want to go deeper, always happy to send over some more resources. But when we're thinking about stewardship, we want to avoid transactional stewardship. This gets away from feeling, personalized and authentic here. So a couple different things to think about are, one, just timing your thank you and making sure it's coming out authentically and timely so that folks feel, the gratitude for the gift. We always recommend kind of that there are a couple different thank yous that go out for folks when they first make a gift for your organization. So one is just ASAP, right? You're getting an initial thank you and acknowledgement to them right away for the gift. Usually happens either automatically from our organization's kind of payment processing system, where we're able to add in a custom message. Could be an email that comes the day after, but this is the first thank you. Important to know that we usually have about 90 days to define how a new donor views us and views the relationship. So oftentimes we encourage folks to try to get in 2 other thank yous in those 90 days to solidify yourself as an organization, especially if they're a new donor, as one that they want to continue to support. And it doesn't mean sending the same thank you right 3 times, but really thinking about, okay, let's send one thank you, and then maybe the next thank you is a card or a thank you with a quick handwritten note in the margin. And then maybe we're sending a phone call. And this is great, again, different levels of donor. If it's a major donor, we might, offer to meet with them, do a phone call. But we could also send them 3 different letters, one talking about their specific gift, the next, thanking them again and talking about what you're doing this year. The third could be thanking them and inviting them to something. So trying to think about that sequencing. And again, you can segment. It doesn't have to be that for every donor you're doing this, but maybe the donors that give in the first, in certain months, you're then segmenting out 3 other kind of notes or emails to them. Another way to kind of personalize things are thinking about anniversaries. So reminding them 1 year in how glad you are that they are a supporter. Depending on what your different tracking software looks like as an organization or your CRM, you may not be able to do this. You may not be tracking this, but just really thinking about, are there ways to personalize if you collect birthdays or when their giving was, or when they've hit a certain kind of dollar milestone for your organization. Reaching out to them and congratulating them and thanking them helps to make it a little bit more personal there. And then here, just really encourage you to think about, we have, a full, like I said, webinar on stewardship and kind of a stewardship matrix, but really consider how stewardship changes by type of donor. We're not going to steward all of our donors the exact same way. It doesn't make sense for our own capacity, but for different levels of giving, what are we going to do, right? So maybe at that under $100 level, we're sending that thank you card or 2 thank you cards. Maybe at that 500 level, we're giving a call and we're doing a thank you card. Maybe we're offering a coffee a little bit higher than that. Maybe for our recurring donors, our thank yous look different. So just kind of defining what that looks like for different donors will allow you to kind of streamline, again, prioritize where you want to be, or where you want to spend your time. And then finally, last piece here is just when you are putting together this thank you letter, a couple tips to kind of rise above the thank you noise here. And it's really just to be authentic. You don't want to use those vague generalities. You want to make the language feel emotive and personal. Again, going back to different motivations. If you create a donor persona of who your ideal donor is, kind of what do they care about? What are they motivated by? Using that language in the thank you, sharing impact, especially if there is an event that folks donated at, you're putting together, what the event allows you to do or the impact of that. Getting feedback. This goes back to our kind of creating a positive experience through the clear communication. We're thinking about spaces to get our donors feedback, asking opinion when thanking. This really, I think, best happens in a one-on-one meeting or a small group meeting. Not typically something we're doing in a thank you letter is asking people for feedback. What we're trying to do is really just thank them, but offering places for feedback so people know that their opinion is valued. And then finally, just thinking about not using the same letter or story repeatedly, making some changes so it feels new or custom. So just thinking about this year to year, maybe, changing up the thank yous that you're sending quarterly or swapping in or out a new story quarterly, or testimonial or stat that you're using just to make sure it feels fresh. And of course, always say for folks who have a recurring donor program or have those monthly donors, just making sure any thank yous that are going to recurring donors aren't the exact same thank you every month. Of course, if it's like the tax receipt, that can be the same every month, but having it be, the personalized thank you is a little bit different each time. And then finally, if you're thinking about this, again, stewardship, we're thinking about personalized events. If you have the capacity to do this, stewardship events can be really helpful for donors. We are not to build that relationship. We're not asking money from folks here, but we're really, we might be able to tell them about our organization, tell about the impact they've made, and we're really just spending time thanking them and letting them be in community with others who are giving to our organizations. So this could be something you would be thinking about at the larger scale if you're not able to have one-on-one meetings, but you still want to do something in person intentionally for folks here. And so last thing I'll leave you with just here are some quick tips, some next steps. I covered a lot. I covered all parts of the donor cycle here, pretty high level, some personalization around. But if you're looking at what to do next, first thing here I would just recommend is just thinking about what motivates you and if these motivations seem to resonate and kind of play out with your audience. Craft that compelling case that covers the who, the what, the why, and the how. Identifying donor, helping donors visualize their impact, relooking at your thank you letters, the language you're using, how are you sharing that impact, how are you getting to different motivations. Updating your thank you template as you think about this and creating a stewardship timeline. What does it look like for your organization? What is individual kind of relationship cultivation? look like as an organization. All right, I'm going to pause here because I see a couple questions. I see just one question. Yes, we will be sending out the slides and the recording following. So you'll get that in the eval email here. Yeah, how can we figure out what donor identities are most relevant to our audience? So first, as we think about it, sometimes this can just look like A/B testing, that you send the same email and you segment out your audience, right, into 2 groups or maybe 3 groups. And maybe you send a very similar email, but you use 3 different types of language in them. One maybe focused on a little bit more of the game plan, some on information, some on vision, and just see which one gets a little bit more interaction. That being said, you're probably not going to focus just on information, vision, game plan, or emotion. You're going to do a blend of all of them, but really thinking, okay, if it's a 60-40 split, how much am I spending on one versus the other, and just seeing which email gets the most interaction. The other, if you're kind of more, if you're in a one-on-one conversation or in a group conversation, some things that you can ask the group can be around, how'd you find our organization? What made you interested in supporting us? And hearing a little bit more about their reasoning. So just asking straight up if you have that ability in a small group or a one-on-one conversation. Could also look like if you are soliciting, folks' opinions in a survey, just asking, when you think about our work, what stands out most to you? And then maybe you share something from, game plan, information, vision, emotion for it. What motivates you? Is it this client testimonials? Is it our, XYZ impact? And getting information from them to better tailor it. It's a great question. Yeah, not to be asking for donations within newsletters. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Yeah, so when you're putting together a donor newsletter, certainly would always have a place for folks to donate to your organization at the bottom, but especially if you're sending it out pretty regularly, either, bi-weekly or monthly, ensuring that a lot of the, if we're thinking about a donor newsletter, that it's also about that donor education. We're telling donors about what we're doing. We're talking about impact, and then we're also talking about donating. The more regular you have it, probably the less that you want to make the full focus, hey, donate to our organization. But, and this is separate than I would say a campaign. So if you're doing a campaign, right, an email campaign that is focused on bringing in donations to the organization, absolutely you should be asking in those newsletters that you're sending for that campaign to be giving to your organization. But if you have a donor newsletter that is really aimed at communicating with your donors, updating them, keeping them aware of impact, giving them that inside scoop, we just encourage you not to have the focus of every single one be in that more transactional, asking for donations, but maybe 2 of the 4 you're sending in the year are focused on that, and 2 are really focused on information you're sharing. So it's a little bit of a blend there. Yeah, is there a communication cadence that is suggested for everyone? I'd say it depends on the capacity of your organization. And what you have found, if you're able to track email open rates, what's working there. I know, not great answer. But as we're thinking about this, we see some folks do quarterly newsletters, like kind of seasonal newsletters for their donors. I've also seen some monthly newsletters for donors. I would say more than that sometimes can go by the wayside, that people aren't always opening them up and clicking and interacting. And we know a lot of work goes into them. So I'd encourage kind of either the monthly or quarterly cadence. From there, it just depends on the type of donor, especially if we're thinking about major donors, how much they want to be communicated with. We have some major donors in our own network who want to just hear from us once a year when they're making their gift. We have others who want to meet, halfway through the year and towards the end of the year to hear more personally about what's happening with the program. But I'd say if we're thinking kind of large scale or like segments, definitely would think about, monthly or quarterly, kind of when you have updates for your donors, what would be important for them. And especially in this time, when there might be rapid changes to our programming, if it's important to tell our donors something that's happening with our programming that they can get involved in, can kind of come out of that cadence, but really just creating something regular that they can rely on and know to kind of hear about your organization. All right, I know we're a little over time. If folks have other questions, happy to always meet one-on-one and talk this through your own strategy at your organization. So feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thanks for being here, and we'll send out the slides and recording. Thanks all.